Welcome back to the channel. Here's another video on Ghost Patrol and the actions of the SIG. So at the end of the first video, the SIG had basically been, the idea had been made and the unit had been, the building blocks had been laid. Going to skip forward in time because that's what the book does. And I suppose this is important because this actually lays the groundwork of how you actually navigate in the desert. I'm not going to just verbatim quote the book or just go through, oh, well, the book said this and then this, then this, then this. I'm going to take this chunk and use it to make a video out of. So, it starts with something that's rather interesting and something that's an event that quite a few people often overlook, and that is soldiers when they are not on the battlefield. Soldiers and officers alike who are not on the battlefield, especially in North Africa. Now, North Africa was much more, I don't want to say relaxed because it wasn't, the actual main army wasn't very relaxed, but the special forces elements were very relaxed, and in fact there was a big appeal for people to try out for the special forces, the SAS, the SBS, the LRDG, or the ABCD, all the other acronyms that were out there, all the other special forces. So basically, the guy we're following, the guy who's basically escorting this hodgepodge commando group, we'll get into them later, is Captain David Lloyd Owen. Captain Owen, he is in Cairo, in the Burqa district. It's called the Burqa district, and that's right. It's actually the red light district of Cairo. The red light district was women of ill repute, drinking places, and the book says the LRDG started out in a coffee house and they ended up basically just a drunken mess stumbling around Cairo. And then in the morning, and some of them are still pretty drunk. They jump in their Chevys, which the Chevy, that's an LRDG Chevy. Basically, machine guns. Every now and then they had a 20mm Breda captured Italian. That's actually an Italian autocannon. The ones you see on those, they captured them when the Italians got absolutely stomped. That'll come up again later as well. So they are these drunken and hungover and very, very excited and happy LRDG guys. Basically show us what the huge difference is between, this is a true event, and it's the massive difference between a regular army unit and a unit like the Long Range Desert Group. They get a bunch of these flares that are called, I actually have it written down here, very lights. So very light flares, I'll put a picture up there. And they do donuts and circles around and in front of the Great Pyramids outside of Cairo and shoot flares up over them and basically have a little fireworks show. But that's not a very good idea because it turns out the MPs are actually based very close to there. And the MPs and the LRDG basically get in like a little police chase until the LRDG are surrounded, and Captain David Lloyd Owen, with a sore head and not feeling so great, basically walks over to the MPs and tells them that, no, it's okay because we're in the LRDG, and yeah, he just goes off in a room with them for a while and talks it over. He actually gets in trouble for doing this. He and his men actually do get reprimanded for this by their commanding officer, but not that bad. And it's actually he actually wrote in his journal something to the effect of, they should have been honored that I even bothered to talk to them because I could have just taken off in the desert. What are they going to do? Follow me? So he could have just got out of there, but he did take the time to explain himself and his men to these MPs who either understood or were told to understand. So what were they going to do? What was their mission? Well, they were told that they were going to do something in, I can't remember what it was. It's so irrelevant because it's a fake story, but they were going somewhere in Libya. That they were going to do something in some behind the lines behind the Axis lines like thing. It was a total lie. Who knew what was going on? Well, Lloyd Owen knew where they had to go, which was this oasis. There are multiple oases, but he knows that they have to get the final oasis they have to get to. And yeah, he doesn't know what the mission is, The only one who really knows what the mission is Captain Sterling, or maybe Major Sterling at this point, David Sterling, the founder of the SAS. He's pretty much the only one who knows what's going on. And he is actually forbidden to tell Winston Churchill of this, because Winston Churchill is seen as this liability because he likes to run his mouth and brag. I don't actually think that's true. I think that's just the High Command being overly cautious / trying to get back at Churchill, because Churchill was the one who was actually keeping the SAS and the SBS and the LRDG and the ABCD, all ABC doesn't actually unit, it's just a thing. He's the one keeping all these alphabet organizations afloat. Churchill, if you read this book here, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, which I've read multiple times, and I'll do a video about that. This is actually the story of basically all the weaponry, commando operations, how the commandos came to exist, the training, Fairbairn and Sykes, the guys who trained the commandos. It's giant. It's a really, really good book. But Churchill was basically the guy who was facilitating these special forces. Churchill was very, very interested in unconventional warfare. Extremely interested in it. And he's the one who actually pushes SIG and the SAS and the LIDG. He pushes them all. And David Sterling is actually frequently going to dinners with Churchill, where he's basically like, oh, well, we did this operation. We blew up all these aircraft, telling him these war stories, basically, and then hinting at the end, like, but the guys are a bit worried because we're not actually a permanent unit, and the army doesn't really like us because the army and SOE are basically fighting over these special forces units. The army wants the special forces units under their control, and they want them part of the actual army, so they can dictate what they do. But at the same time, SOE wants them under their control so they can have them do dodgy stuff, because if they're under army control, they have to follow these rules, and if they get caught, then it's like, well, these are army units, you're responsible. But if they get caught and they're part of the SOE, it's like, well, the army can just say, well, we have no idea what the hell's going on here, and the government can even turn around and say, well, we don't know what's going on here either. So these commandos, there's this big power struggle, so basically the only guy who knows what's going on is David Sterling, and so these commandos are just going off into the desert. But they're thrilled. They're absolutely thrilled to be going off into the desert. But why would you possibly be thrilled about going into the desert? They don't enjoy it. They really don't enjoy going into the desert. It's a horrible experience. The book goes into detail. Water rationing, that you have to clean your food with sand. You have to clean your utensils with sand. It's an awful place. Your vehicles break down. You've got to pull them out. It's terrible. There's aircraft that can blow you up. People want to shoot at you. But why were they so excited? Well, going into the desert means you didn't have to go on road watch. Road watch was basically, it was different things to different people. So the commandos themselves saw road watch as busy work, as a punishment, as the same as just guard duty. Basically, road watch was you set yourselves up in Axis area, watching the road, and just noting down literally every single vehicle that came past. And if you could spot a unit identification, write that down. Anything that goes past, write it down. No matter how trivial. Bicycle group, write them down. Civilian truck, write it down. Tank, write it down. And if you got spotted, you were in deep trouble. So it was dangerous. It was boring. They saw it as useless. But why were they doing it? Well, was it just busy work to get the commandos? It was actually very critically important work. So, not MK Ultra, that's the other one. Anyway, the Ultra program, not MK Ultra, the actual Ultra program, which was the decryption of the Enigma machine. That's an Enigma. It's like a typewriter thing, but it's not a typewriter. It's a code encoding machine and a decoder. Basically, the Allies had cracked Enigma, but they were worried. Okay, when you get into intelligence work, which I'm not in, but you get in intelligence work, you have this constant thing of, we're deceiving them, but they could be deceiving us about how we're deceiving them, so we have to deceive their deception of us, which could then be deceived by them. Like, you're constantly playing this game of, like, it's like rock, paper, scissors. Well, I'll pick rock, but he knows I always pick rock, so he's going to pick paper, so I'll pick scissors, but he knows that I always pick rock, and now I might go scissors, so I'm going to pick paper instead, because he'll go rock to smash the scissors. Like, you have this constant game going on you can never find an answer to. So the Allies are monitoring the traffic, and they're not sure if the Germans know that they've been decrypted or not. And Enigma is critical, by the way, for the war effort in the Atlantic Ocean. Without Enigma, they're lost cause. Enigma and what was it called? The naval unit, basically the wargaming naval unit with the Watu, I think it was called. That unit. Anyway, so why am I talking about that? Anyway, so Rommel had been sending these messages. We had a defeat today, very low on resources. I need tanks, I need food, I need men, I need buttons, I need boots, I need ammunition, I need bayonets, I need the little officer cap thingies that with the badges on the front. I need the badges for the officer caps. I need literally everything. I have no supplies. I'm like 2 days away from being totally killed. More water, more food, more men, more motorcycles, everything. Give me more, everything. He was sending these messages, and the British were looking at them going, that's not true at all. Or, that's an exaggeration of what's going on. The British were like, well, he's not 2 days away from defeat. We know exactly what he's doing. We have spies in his units. They're not that far from defeat. We know he's definitely got tanks, and he's definitely got men, and he's definitely got... this is sort of mid-war era, 1942. So the Allies can't figure out what's going on, and they figure, okay, well, what if the Germans have figured out what we're doing, and they're countering our espionage? So they're deliberately trying to mess with us by sending fake Enigma reports. That's bad, because if they know that we know about Enigma, then all that time has been wasted and we have to find the new code. The Axis didn't know about the Enigma cracking. They actually thought that all these intelligence leaks were coming from the Italians. They generally just thought, oh, well, the Italians are just telling everyone everything. That actually comes from Hans von Luck's book. Hans von Luck talks about this as well, where he basically got to the point where he would not talk to Italian officers because they were just civs as far as the Germans were concerned. They were, but they weren't because Enigma was going on. And the reason they thought Rommel, the reason that Rommel sort of lent a little bit of credibility to this theory is that Rommel had set up, he was very obsessed with radios. Rommel loved radios, and Rommel loved to intercept other people's radios. And he'd actually set up a unit with a very long acronym that I'll put on the screen here to intercept British radio transmissions. This unit had been destroyed by Australians who overran it at one point and wiped it out, or destroyed all its equipment. However, there were still these DK units. These DT units or DK units, so these directional units. Basically, they couldn't listen into what you were saying, but they could find out where you were saying it. And sort of like a triangulation type thing. And the LRDG was terrified of these things because if you're operating in the desert, you're driving around, you have to tell people where you are. Or, behind schedule 3 days, ahead of schedule 2 days, so you can coordinate with everyone else. And so to do that, you had to set up these giant 10, 12 foot tall poles, and you had to sit on the thing, and you couldn't use your voice because you would be on the phone too long. You'd be on the radio too long, and you'd absolutely be pinpointed. So the LRDG had to use Morse code that was double encrypted, just for the pure fact that by the time you decrypted it, if you were the enemy, you would already have moved from that position, and it was useless to you. However, if you were the Allies, you could then go, okay, well, they were there yesterday, or they were there 12 hours ago. It's still useful information to them. But for the enemy, it's like, well, they were there 12 hours ago. They could be anywhere by now. So the double encryption was quite clever. So the LIDG go off to this sort of oasis where they meet up with the commandos. The commandos also have with them some sappers and some radio guys, some signals operators, and the SBS, the Special Boat Service, members of the Special Boat Service. And everyone is basically, including the SBS, are very, very confused about why the Special Boat Service is in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And so will you be until I tell you at the end of the book why these guys are there, because it's actually quite important. And they're led by Major Campbell, a Scotsman, who is he's actually wearing a kilt, which is funny. So they're led by Major Campbell, who basically has dysentery. He's not very healthy at all. And they arrive at this sort of oasis, and they tool up and off they go. Now, the way that Commandos and LIDG worked was the Commandos had these big army trucks, these 3-ton things, which were not good at going through the desert at all. They didn't have a lot of guns, they weren't very maneuverable, they got bogged a lot. One of the Commando officers actually jumped behind the wheel and crashed one of them, destroyed the truck, totally wrote it off. No one was killed, but he ruined the truck. So now the other Commando trucks are even more burdened. And the policy was that if any dust clouds came on the horizon, or if there was a plane anywhere in the sky, the Commandos were to immediately floor it and just drive off directly away from the dust cloud. Run. And the LRDG would swoop around and engage, and then they'll find the Commandos because they can follow the tracks and they can track you in the desert. The LRDG, that's what they do. So this doesn't happen. They get to a cotton plantation, and this cotton plantation, it's quite nice. And the LRDG seem quite comfortable here. And there's a big cotton barn with all these big bales of cotton, and the commandos are just told, I lie down on there for a while. And the LRDG disappear and come back with ice-cold beer and sherry and brandy, and everyone gets frightfully drunk at this cotton plantation. And it's the officers all basically catch up with one another, and it turns out this plantation is actually owned by... it's not a plantation as much as it is a sort of a warehouse. Cotton's a very thirsty crop, but it's basically a cotton processing warehouse. It's actually owned by the guy who's come up with the mission, Colonel Haleston. Haleston? It's said differently in the audiobook anyway. Lieutenant Colonel Haleston, who basically has come up with the mission, and he is basically the British premier spy in North Africa, and the guy who's running a lot of intelligence. He ran Operation Flipper, which the SBS guy in charge of the unit with the SBS now was involved in Flipper. Flipper was... okay, how do I go back? Okay. There was an operation to kill... There was a British claim they only had one official assassination operation during the entire World War II, and it was to kill Heinrich... what's his name? Reinhard Heinrich, the SS guy in charge of Czechoslovakia, or that area. That's not true. Operation Flipper was a thing to kill Rommel. So, and it failed because Rommel just wasn't at home. They bust into his headquarters. He just wasn't there. So they had to flee because the guards were alerted. The plan was basically they had a submarine land a bunch of SBS, storm ashore, go into Rommel's headquarters with machine guns and kill him, and then run away. Wasn't a very good plan. But Lieutenant Colonel Haleston was actually half Italian, and with the right sort of sketchy makeup and clothing, he was actually able to blend in as a native, which he did all the time. He spent many weeks living in the area around Rommel's HQ. That's how he had such good intelligence. He was actually just living there, posing as a native. This warehouse was actually a third-generation warehouse. He grew up in Egypt. He went to school in England, including university, but he actually grew up in Egypt. His father was there. His grandfather was all there. He could speak the language fluently. He was a brilliant spy. He used to walk around as a goat herder. He could just tag into a convoy with his goats, like a few goats, just walk along and chat with the Italians, and they would just tell him information. That's right. The best thing he does is he wants to reconnoitre an airfield, but he just can't get to the airfield. There's no way that he's allowed in there. Foreign workers aren't on the airfield, but he has to find out some piece of information. So he gets a bunch of goats and just scares them onto the airfield, and then walks around like, oh, very sorry, I got to get my goats, and oh, I'm very sorry, Italians, who just sort of laugh at him. But he actually maps the entire airfield out. Like, he walks the runway, counts the number of hangars, counts the aircraft, has a look at the refueling stations, totally maps the airfield, and gives the information to his superiors. So, Lieutenant Colonel Haleston is one of the best spies that the British have at this point. Anyway, that's relevant. And then they set out again, these commandos and these LRDGs set out for the journey proper, which is another few days until they come to another oasis. These oases are sort of small, just sort of pools of water where you can swim. You can't swim, but you can wash yourself. You can actually drink as much water as you want. The LRDG rulebook basically banned drinking during the day because you would just sweat it straight out again immediately. You would better off drinking at night, rebuild your fluids for the next day when you could sweat it all out. You weren't allowed to wash your utensils with water. The water you were given also had to be put in the radiator of the vehicle. So don't drink at all. The men didn't shave because that just used more water. One of the guys actually couldn't shave, and so he just grew his hair long. Probably not as long as this, but he sort of grew his hair longer than normal because that was just... He needed to look surly and sort of disheveled, which was the unit's thing. You could wear whatever uniforms you wanted as long as it was British. So there were guys there with Australian slouch hats and pith helmets and Highland bonnets and the New Zealand like lemon squeezer things. They look a lot. They're basically the American ones with like the 4 pointed slouch hat things. Whereas Australians have the like 2 ridges with the thing like that. South African, like you just whatever you wanted to wear, you could wear. Kilts, whatever. There weren't a lot of kilts, but you could feasibly wear it. And a lot of guys wearing the sort of Arabic cloth cover with the band around the head. And the commandos basically jeer at the guys for wearing these. They're like, "What are you doing? You're just trying to fit in with the locals. You're trying to show everyone how special you are and how native you are. Like you're trying to blend into you got this whole desert complex about you, where you think you're the next Lawrence of Arabia, and it turns out no, they're actually wearing these things because they're extremely useful. You can pull them over your face, they keep the sun off your neck, and a few commandos actually end up making their own, or borrowing some, or stealing some, or whatever. So they set out towards Kufra. Kufra was actually an Italian place. The Italians had invaded it, and under Mussolini, the Italians invaded it, took it over, and built a fortress there. And then the British just walked in and took it off them. And now there's a Welsh company who's controlling Kufra. It's actually behind Axis lines. And Kufra is behind Axis lines. It's a giant oasis, like a 50-mile dip in the ground. There's an oasis. There's this covered in palm trees with dates on them. They're described as having so many palm trees that when the men go to sleep and they wake up, they're just covered in dates that have fallen off these trees. Paradise, absolute paradise. You can swim in it. The British actually make swimming pools there. It's fantastic, great place. There's actually a mosque there. There's a little village. It's an established area, but it's just too hard to take. And even if the Germans or Italians retook it, they would still have to supply it, and the LRGG would just take it off them again. So they basically just have this thing that they can't deal with in their rear lines. So on the way to Kufra, the commandos and the LRDG basically run through the process. If a truck breaks down, Top Gear rules, do not stop to help. The men in the truck are responsible for getting the truck back on track. If you stop to help, then you might get stuck, or someone might see the two vehicles and attack them, and now we've got 2 trucks lost instead of just 1. It was rough, but it was the most practical thing to do was just leave it. They can handle themselves. They're frigging commandos. They should know how to unditch a truck or debog a truck, or and the commando trucks were like 2 or 3 times as heavy as the other trucks. They would get bogged more often. Something else that is terrifying, and luckily they didn't come across, but apparently this was a routine thing to come across in the desert, was you could accidentally hit a hornet nest just without seeing it and just plow straight over it, which would piss the hornets off and they would chase you. And there was actually procedures of how to deal with being chased by hornets, which I imagine goes something like plant your foot as fast as possible and drive just that way. But it's not actually given in the book, but there were processes for dealing with a hornet nest that you pissed off. So on the way to Kufra, they're almost there. They're actually quite close to Kufra now, and about a day away. And they look around, and behind them is a dust cloud. And immediately Owen peels off and heads directly for it. Without telling anybody, his command car just peels off and just goes for it, and the rest of the LRDG follow, while the commandos, who are pretty terrified, just keep going towards Kufra. They don't know where it is, but they've basically just been told, head west and we'll guide you in. So they just keep heading west, and the LRDG just fly around to engage whoever this is. There is no one behind them. There are no friendly units in the area. They are the last group to go to Kufra. There could only be enemies. So the LRDG slingshot off to deal with them. Now, to build suspense of this thing, who's at Kufra waiting for these guys? Well, heaps of SAS. Heaps of a few more LRDG units. David Sterling himself is either waiting there or about to arrive there. He has to brief everyone. And there is a plane inbound full of German soldiers to Kufra. So, I did tell a little bit of a lie. There were not actually SAS waiting at Kufra. The SAS were actually behind them. They were 3 days behind schedule, and they just forgot to tell anybody, or they had told someone, and then those people had not told the LRDG. And so Campbell sees the LRDG take off, and then if 10, 15 minutes later, the LRDG just fly past him. The LRDG just, without saying anything, come through the commando line, or they spread out, and they interpenetrate the commando line and just rocket forward. And Campbell just thinks, okay, that's bad. That means that the guys behind were not friendly, and that they're running from them. So the commandos plant the foot even more, which and then the dust cloud gets closer, and the dust cloud gets even closer, and the dust cloud just gets really close until they also interpenetrate the commando lines and rocket forward. And it turns out that was the SAS. They were just behind. And by this point in time, the SAS had gotten good enough at desert navigation that they were able to not rely on the LRDG to get them where they needed to go. They could do it themselves. They had immense respect for one another, but the LRDG basically taught them this dead reckoning, it was called. Every man had to know how to do it. take sun compass dials. You had to know exactly where you were by the sun and stars. You had to basically use every tool at your disposal to find out where you were. They weren't actually allowed to leave until the sun was 20 degrees above the horizon, because otherwise the sun compass just wouldn't work. So, yeah, very, very scientific, very, very intelligent way of navigating the desert was what these guys did. So they all arrived in Kufra. They spent a day or two just having a drink, swimming in the giant oasis, swimming in the pools that have been set up, talking with the locals. And then a plane comes overhead, and it circles, and then it lands on this little airfield that they've got set up, a little airstrip. And out of this plane comes 2 British officers and about a platoon's worth of Germans. And they walk down the ramp, and they are speaking German. They are ordered in German. They are ordered to go stand over there in German, which they do in perfect German style. They stand at German attention and wait for German orders, in which case they are given German orders by these British officers. The men then file off to a separate camp, which they set up in a German fashion, and begin talking to each other in German in the way that North African Germans talk to one another, or Germans in North Africa talk to one another. And everyone except Campbell and Owens and the other officers is extremely perplexed by this and very, very concerned, and not really concerned, but they're just sort of extremely confused. That is until Owens and Campbell inform everybody that, no, don't worry, these are not Germans. That's all we've been told, is that they're not Germans. Well, they were told to expect men in German uniforms, mostly Palestinian, they say mostly Palestinian native Germans, which is a weird way of describing that, but anyway. Which is what they were. Most of them were. Remember, of course, Israel wouldn't exist until 1948. So they were basically just rocked up, and they were given a code word, red handkerchief, for if anyone was just needed extra confirmation that this was indeed the people they were waiting for. So I'll leave you right there. I think that's a good enough, what do they call that? Cliffhanger. The SIG has just rocked up. I'll go back and tell you how the SIG got founded. Don't worry. But he says, we just run through the basics of desert warfare first, just to get everyone up to speed, because later on the SIG starts doing their own desert warfare stuff, and if you get the basics out of the way in that, don't stop people who break down, you have very limited water, which also has to go to maintaining the vehicle, but you know, all the basic stuff. If you get attacked, run. If you see an aircraft, run. You can't really transmit intelligence that easily, because the Germans will pinpoint where you are and come after you. Just the basics. So, where are we going to go next time? Well, you'll have to wait and find out. So I'll do another end card. I hope you're enjoying this series. The next thing I'll cover is actually how the SIG was formed. Not exactly who was making it up, although there are two very important people that make up the SIG that we're going to talk about, apart from the guys we've already talked about, two instructors that are crucial to the SIG. So yeah, if you're enjoying the series, make sure you like it and comment below. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff. I have more wargaming videos down there. If you want to recreate some of these actions, bolt action, chain of command are in the link below, and there's a playlist of all my reviews of wargaming books if you want to check them out. To recreate the Punjabi that I talked about before, or the LID, if you want to recreate the Punjabi regiment that Captain Buck was involved with, you just grab the Warlord 8th Army box. If you want to recreate the LRGG SAS, grab the 8th Army box and mix it with the Commonwealth box, because you can just slam all those South African heads, the Highlander bonnets, the Australian slouch hats, New Zealand Freiburg pointy lemon squeezer hats. You mash them all together, pith helmets, smash them all together, create yourself an LRGG SAS force. So just a quick thing about if you wanted to wargame this era. Now, next video is going to be very interesting, so I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.